I think we're now recording, so I'm just going to say this is the August 23rd, 2021 meeting of the Multi-Tenancy Working Group. We don't have a strong agenda today, and we might end up leaving a little bit early, but we've just been having a chat with a couple of the new folks who joined us today, and we're going to be talking about what people want to see out of our QCon panel that we need to record within the next week or so, or 2 weeks. And as well what people are hoping to see out of the multi-tenancy working group. So I just wanted to answer, I think Marco from New York Times was asking about this. There's a couple of projects that have been going on in this group. One of them is Hierarchical Namespaces, which is a way of doing in-cluster multi-tenancy. And then you've got Faye, who's been leading virtual clusters, and that work has mainly moved over to the cluster API repo, correct? Oh, sorry, Marco, that is hierarchical namespaces. I will pop that into the chat. And Faye, what's the latest on virtual clusters?
Oh yeah, the current repo is in cluster API provider nested. It's cap M.
And is that and so like the existing virtual clusters stuff in the repo that's been wound down, right?
Yeah. So the
cool.
So all the new changes we made on the KPN repo for the virtual cluster. But barely in the virtual cluster, the synchronization part is kind of pretty stable. We are mostly working on the tenant control plane management stuff. We're trying to leverage a KPN framework instead of writing our own controller.
Cool. And then we also, so those are the two projects that basically help you to do multi-tenancy. And then in addition to that, we've got the multi-tenancy benchmarks, which are run by Jim. So Jim, do you want to mention that?
Yeah, sure. So the idea there was to provide a way of measuring multi-tenancy. So basically checking both through configuration checks as well as runtime checks, whether a namespace is a provision for multi-tenancy. So we have a fairly good set of benchmarks. It requires like either PSPs or a policy engine to be configured, because it also does things like making sure privilege pods and things which can access hosts, resources, and violate multi-tenancy concerns, those aren't permitted, right? So there's about, if I recall, like 17 or 18 checks so far, and there's a few, requests we received for more checks, but it's certainly, we continue to maintain, add things as things come up, and but it can be, the main use case we've seen is it being used to validate multiple namespaces, but it should be fully reusable with even control planes as a service or virtual clusters or CAPI nested, any form of that.
Thanks, Jim. And one of the things that we were discussing earlier is, does it still make sense to keep this group as a standalone group? Because basically what we did was we started incubating a couple of things in this group. 2 of the 3 have now graduated. So Hierarchical Namespaces graduated to its own repo that was sponsored by SIGAuth. Virtual Clusters has now graduated to its own project that's part of SIG Multicluster, correct, Faye?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so working groups are typically meant to be kind of time-limited entities. They're not usually actually supposed to run for 3 years, which I believe this one has or so. And so one thing that we were thinking about is, we were talking about this in an earlier meeting, does it make sense to maybe move the multi-tenancy benchmarks into something that's owned by SIGAuth directly, perhaps, and say, okay, well, this working group is done. We've basically, we've come up with our new primitives, which are control plane as a service and basically enhancements on top of namespaces, as well as some checks on top of those. Does it make sense to still have something that's dedicated to multi-tenancy, given that the kinds of ways that you can implement that are going to be so tied into the other special interest groups. And so maybe that's something that our new members who have come to this group and not to SIGAuth or anywhere else, maybe this is a good chance for you folks to chime in on that and tell us what you think. Do you think it still makes sense for us to keep this as a standalone group, or should we fold into the special interest groups that started this working group? So why don't I nominate, because he's at the top of my screen, I'll nominate Marco to go first.
Sure. I don't know if I have a strong opinion. This is the first time I've come to any meeting regarding Kubernetes.
Fair enough.
It sounds like if the work has wrapped up and the next item could be handled by people with more, by a group that has more reach, maybe that makes sense, but I don't know. Maybe it makes sense to keep this and keep working on it. I don't know.
Do you view, so just to be clear, the work is not wrapped up, but the work has basically graduated from an incubation phase into a more stable phase. We've figured out what the work is that needs to be done, and that can be kicked off into various places, I think. Is Jim, and Faye, would you agree with that?
Yes, I guess the question would be from an end user perspective, is it clear what multi-tenancy models Kubernetes offers at this point? Or like if you go to the docs, I mean, obviously we're working very closely with these projects, so we know what's available. But yeah, I always wonder, like for new users, I don't know if you go to the Kubernetes docs and search up multi-tenancy, like what do you even get? Where do you, is there a place to start and say, okay, these are the proposed models, or these are some options, and here's where you go for more information. I mean, Marco, when you started researching this, or others, on the meeting, when you looked at this, what did you find first for multi-tenancy?
I found a really nice blog, the 3 ways to do multi-tenancy, and that cleared things up for me a lot.
Okay. Should something like this be in a more official doc somewhere, like maybe in a different form, or?
I feel like that could be useful. Like we've done a couple of blog posts over the years. Maybe we should engage with SIGDocs, document what we found, point people towards the projects that we have,
right?
Like both the sponsored like the CNCF projects that we have sponsored. So what the 3 of us on this call have been doing, plus some of the other community contributions, Loft, Capital, all that stuff.
Right.
Caverno, Gatekeeper, which we haven't really done a lot with either of those in this forum, but obviously they're relevant. Yeah, maybe that should be like a good wrap-up project for this working group, and then we can declare, if not victory, then at least the end of the beginning. I think that Munir, did you have anything that you wanted to add, or like what is it that led you to when you thought of multi-tenancy and you wanted to come join this meeting? Oh, thank you for the offer of help, Marco. Munir, when you said that you wanted to help out with, when you said you wanted to research multi-tenancy, what did you have in mind? Was it the policy? Was it noisy neighbors? Was it something else?
It was more like hard multi-tenancy, and I tried HNC, and I followed even older projects like RTOS, going more towards scalability, but now I'm looking more into HNC, and I think that documentation would be a good place to start for more details and integration of that. I'm at that stage.
So when you said HNC is not designed for what we typically call hard multi-tenancy, so sorry, you're still interested in that, or that's just where you started, but now you've landed up somewhere else?
No, I ended up somewhere else. I started at HNC, honestly. So I've been coming to the group, and I think it's a good resource. So a documentation in the official on the official doc site of Kubernetes would be probably good for the community. Definitely keep that up to date, good, like the Kubernetes documentation. I think that's all we need. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks. And I think Lewis, if you wanted to go next.
Yeah, no, I don't think I have too much to add on top of what's been said. We've been doing a bunch of research into a few of the other technologies you mentioned, like Kyverno, and it kind of, I think there's some centralized documentation on like kind of the state of the world, or where to look at for what the state of the world is, would be helpful. I think like when I was looking through the docs and just trying to kind of see what was going on, ended up on like kind of thinking about attending a spattering of different SIG meetings and looking at and evaluating a few different technologies. And so having something kind of maybe a little bit authoritative on that would, I think, would help. Maybe especially like kind of classifying what sort of use cases and what sort of kind of,
right,
what sort of semantics or whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, and like kind of like lining up the technologies with maybe how things are being approached.
And thanks, Lewis. And I think Harsh, anything you wanted to add to that?
No, not really. I think, moving to the SIGAuth for HNC and virtual cluster belongs to multi-tenancy. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, my opinion is that because the terms of multi-tenancy it's not a new term. It's pretty long. It's a term that's been used in computer science for decades. So that implies a lot of things. But what we have been doing right now in this working group, I'm primarily focusing on the control plane installation, everything what we have been doing. So I think as time goes on, when people dig this problem more and more, they may care more about in the data plane. There's a lot of things in the node. So any isolation part in the node, any. But I would argue that some of that problem may lead to kind of security problem, like the problem of seek all transmos. I don't know if do we have a seek for security? I doubt it.
There is actually now.
We do.
You do? Okay. Yeah. I think ultimately, so two of our three proposed models, either HNC namespace as a service or control as service, we rarely, at least in the upstream, we rarely touch the isolation part in the node.
Right.
Yeah. So, but that I got some questions from people about whether how you isolate node. I'm not sure if we should seek to do something or move that in directions in our working group. That's just one of my concerns. Because for the control plane, it has been 2 years. I rarely see any other choice other than HNC or VC to make these things better. So Arctos was proposed to change, API server or introduce new APIs for tenancy, but in fact, that is not the right direction. I mean, most of us saying the overhead is too hard. I mean, it's really hard for people to change all the plugin to introduce new API for tenancy. That's what I saw. And Arctos seems to, drop that idea, moving to either HNC or VC type of thing. So that's the reason I was thinking as a working group, maybe we can think of more about what should be helping the node for multi-tenancy.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. And I recently had a discussion with the architect at a pretty large SaaS company, and they had similar questions because they had initially assumed that the control plane as a service also gave them node isolation, which was a good point of discussion and clarification. So they're like, okay, well, so we obviously need a combination of different tools and techniques, right? So I think there's still a few things missing perhaps in that big picture to say if you really want, I guess, quote unquote, hard multi-tenancy or some level of multi-tenancy, what exactly do you need to do? And if you want to completely isolate workloads, there's a lot more that needs to be done.
Yeah, it's funny because like in the 2 years or so that I've been here, we rarely got into the SaaS use case that much. And we didn't really, there wasn't a lot of demand to get into the protecting the workload to that level of detail. And I think that this would probably resonate with our guests today, like from if you think about the New York Times, you probably aren't worried about two New York Times developers trying to attack each other. There's usually within an organization a certain level of trust,
Right.
And you're more worried about misconfigurations. I engaged in a campaign within GKE, which was unsuccessful, to ban the term multi-tenancy completely. Because I hate the term tenant, because what is a tenant? Is it a person? Is it a workload? Is it a team? Is it a, when we talk about SaaS, we often talk about producer consumer. So the producer is the organization offering the service, which of course may have multiple teams, each of which can be a tenant, and multiple workloads. And then you have the consumers, which are, for the case of GKE, would be anybody using GKE.
Right.
Or even the same customer using GKE, but in two different projects, which they basically ask for isolation from each other. In the multi-team use case, you generally don't need hard isolation of the data plane. You might want it for some reasons, but you're probably not worried about hacks. In the multi-consumer use case, you absolutely do need to care about that. This group has tended to veer more towards what I would call the multi-team use case, both for control plane as a service and also for namespace as a service. Even, for example, for virtual clusters, I believe one of the largest users is Apple, and of course that is within their own organization. They just thought, we don't want to have to coordinate CRD versions across every development team. We want them all to be able to just, I don't know if that's actually why they're using it. I have to go back and watch the keynote again. But they have given everybody their own control plane, but I don't know if, at least I don't think it's been brought up frequently in this venue, that they need runtime isolation, sandboxing from each other. So yeah, I don't know if I would say that this working group has not completed its work until solve that problem. There are pieces of solutions available for that, but I would almost want to see like a WG SaaS for that use case, because in that case, there would be a large number of things that might need to be solved, of which the data plane isolation would only be one of them. Yeah, again, I haven't really seen the demand in this group. People, like, I would say maybe 3 to 1, 4 to 1 on the team versus SaaS. Does that match for the other longtime group members? Does that kind of match what you've seen showing up at this group?
Yeah, certainly it's more internal teams trying to share resources, share clusters versus external, I guess, end customers for the, for whoever's running the application.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think this is useful, and I think that we might take, like Jim Fay and I, maybe we can take this along with Tasha. I think we're the 4 speakers on the panel, correct?
I believe so. Yeah, we'll have to check if Ryan was on there as well or not.
Yeah. And maybe we can basically prepare a couple of notes and
Sure.
redo a version of this conversation for KubeCon. And that'll probably get us some interesting feedback one way or another, rather than just giving an update on what we've done. But yeah, take the idea that we need to document everything that we've done, so that in official documentation, not just blog posts, so that it's easy for people to, as I forget who said it, but I think it was Marco, to get a good view on the current state of the art. And given that these models were introduced about 2 years ago, we haven't seen a lot of diversity. In addition to those, we've seen a lot of implementations of the same idea, but nothing really like that came out of left field that we didn't see. So there's a couple of virtual cluster implementations now. I just discovered that there's a second hierarchical namespace implementation that's like explicitly based on HNC, but got some of the details different, which is unfortunate that they didn't email me first, because we probably could have just put that into HNC. But I think that validates that, like, these are the models that people want to use. And we're not seeing like this huge explosion that we thought might happen.
Right. Yeah, I guess one other question would be like roadmaps for both, I guess the CAPI nested as well as, HNC, because I think there were some questions also on the Slack channel on when would HNC hit 1.0? What's the plan for that? Things like that would be good to capture.
Not sure if I'll be able to capture that by next. You mean in the docs or in the KubeCon presentation?
I guess both, right? So in the presentation, at least we can talk to some of the immediate plans, but then longer term, perhaps it's worth a session or two to kind of figure out what is needed to bring these to a 1.0 sort of release, right? Or at least where we're saying it's generally available, can be used in production.
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
So Adrian, like you mentioned, like there are multiple implementations at this point for virtual clusters. Like I know about at least 3. Like there's KCP, there's one by Loft, and the one this group has. So I think, like, I'm not saying this for the KubeCon presentation, but in general, like I think it would be good if we can point out the similarities and differences. Like for one thing, like all of these 3 have the concept of syncer, and I heard in one of the KCP presentations that it was a live stream. So basically, they said that it would be nice to have a common syncer across all these projects, right? So such sort of differences and similarities might be good to point out and talk about.
Faye, do you want to? That's a good question, Harsh. I think there's only 2, because the one that this team owned basically moved to CAPI, so that's only one, and then there's Loft. Faye, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think what Harsh means KCP is from Red Hat, right?
Yeah, like it's open source, yeah, but I think Red Hat folks are leading it. And also one more thing just came to my mind was KCP does something really cool with CRDs. Like if there are 2 clusters which have 2 different CRDs installed in them, they do a type negotiation between the CRDs, which is pretty cool. So I don't know, like there are some things.
Yeah, if you are talking about the KCP from Red Hat, so we had a meeting with Red Hat before. I think the direction is kind of slightly different in the sense that they want to make the very concise control plane. It's not even, they want to make extremely trimmed version control plane for tenant. So they get rid of all objects that you don't need. So they probably even get rid of they probably just leave the pod or even get rid of a pod. If you don't need a pod, you don't have a pod. That's they call it not a virtual cluster, they call it the logical cluster. That's a term that they use. They call it logical cluster. So for Loft and VC, yes, the difference is hard to see for the new guys. At a glance, they're the same. So I would admit they're the same. But the underlying implementation is different. So I think it'd be good if in the panel we can compare this and give the so Andrew, what you're saying. So I think it's okay. We can make some distinguished points because there are some assumptions for the 2 models, both virtual cluster model and the Loft. So in the Loft model, I think the major difference is for the use cases for the Loft use case, they assume that the user can access the underlying supercluster, whatever cluster they own, the underlying clusters. But in virtual cluster is more tends towards kind of a SaaS model or multi-team model. So they can only access the virtual cluster. They don't have access to the underlying superclusters. That makes these assumptions makes quite different in terms of implementation from some aspects. I would argue that would be the major differences. But for the new people, it's hard to see in the beginning. I think it's okay if we can leverage this chance to make some comparison. I think that's a good idea, but let's see if it can fit in our plan for the panel. If we have some slides, I think it's good to compare.
Definitely, and also like as a group, maybe like there are 3 different projects working on 3 different syncers. So like maybe have one common syncer project.
That's the reason.
Yeah.
But that's the reason I was saying so. Because of the assumptions, then merging the syncer can be quite difficult. So we in the past meetings we have a dedicated meeting to talk with a lot of guys to see if 2 syncer can be combined. And the conclusion is that we can't, because the change is very intrusive. And
okay, thanks.
Yeah, it's a little bit like saying, why can't Linux and Windows share a kernel? It's like, well, I mean, in a way they should be able to, but in another way, it's hard to swap out your kernel.
Yeah.
Although not impossible, Apple's done it a couple of times now.
Okay.
So anything else anyone wanted to bring up today? If not, maybe we can call it a day there. But just so that everybody knows, there, if you want to talk to us, there's the Slack channel, and there is the mailing list for anybody who wants to pop up. I usually answer my Slack messages within a day or 2, but maybe not right away. And failing that, this has been useful, and I think that we'll be able to take some of what we discussed today, turn it into our panel, which we will record by the end of next week. And it'll be maybe a little bit out of date by the time it gets presented at KubeCon in October, but hopefully we'll be able to have a couple of decisions, or at least directions, for the future of this group. Any closing thoughts from anybody? I did see somebody just popped up, Sergio, if you wanted to say hi and let us know why you were joining in today. Nope. Okay. Anything else from anybody? Jim, Faye, or visitors?
So I guess maybe just more of concern to the 3 of us on here. I guess we can discuss on Slack, but should we just draft up a list of questions and coordinate with Tasha? Or what do you suggest as the next step?
Yeah, why don't I start a doc, throw it on the Slack, and we can
Okay, cool.
move from there. So Marco asks, who do I reach out to help with docs? I have recorded your offer for help, which is very generous, so thank you. I've recorded that in our meeting notes, which, by the way, if people don't know, the meeting notes are here. If you don't like anything that I wrote about you, by the way, you can feel free to change what I wrote about you. Please don't change what we wrote about anyone else. I think probably the best thing to do is make sure you're on the Slack. And then once we have some kind of decision about how we're going to do this, I'd imagine we'll set up a shared doc and some kind of proposal, and we will get in touch with you, because having help to work with docs is always good, and I'm sure SIG docs would agree with that. They will never turn down help. Anything else from anybody? Okay, well, with that, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. Hope you got what you came for, and we will talk to you again soon.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.